From a tearful actress whose head was cropped from an uncomfortable nude scene to a commemorative bronze plaque that mysteriously vanished overnight from a Brooklyn sidewalk, Spike Lee's groundbreaking 1989 masterpiece, Do the Right Thing, is packed with behind-the-scenes secrets that are stranger than fiction. Radio Raheem's iconic boombox now sits in the Smithsonian. Samuel L. Jackson spent most of filming asleep in a radio booth, and the film's original title was completely different. Prepare to discover the shocking casting rejections, production mishaps, and bizarre coincidences that shaped one of cinema's most important films. Fact 1. The film's original title was Heat Wave. Before Do the Right Thing became one of cinema's most recognizable titles, Spike Lee had a completely different name in mind for his groundbreaking 1989 film. The original screenplay was written under the title Heat Wave, which directly reflected the scorching summer setting that drives the entire story forward. Lee's inspiration for this heat-focused title came from an unlikely source, a 1950s television episode that had stuck with him since childhood. When Lee was just 6 years old, he watched an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, called Shopping for Death, that explored a fascinating and disturbing theory about human behavior. In this episode, the main characters discuss how murder rates and violent crimes increase when temperatures rise above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. This concept became the foundation for Lee's entire film, as he wanted to explore how extreme heat could push already simmering racial tensions in a Brooklyn neighborhood to their breaking point. The working title, Heat Wave, perfectly captured this central theme, emphasizing how the oppressive summer weather would serve as both a literal and metaphorical pressure cooker for the characters throughout that fateful day. Cinematographer Ernest Dickerson later revealed that when Spike Lee first approached him about the project, Lee was still calling it Heat Wave, and specifically told him, "I'm writing a script that takes place on the hottest day of summer, and I want you to figure out a way for the audience to feel heat." This direction led to the film's distinctive visual style, with its warm color palette of reds, yellows, and oranges that make viewers feel like they're sweating alongside the characters. The eventual title change to Do the Right Thing shifted the focus from the environmental catalyst to the moral choices each character must make when tensions finally explode into violence and chaos. Fact 2. Robert De Niro turned down Sal's role. When Spike Lee was casting his ambitious third feature film, there was one actor he desperately wanted for the crucial role of Sal, the Italian-American pizzeria owner at the heart of the story's racial tensions. That actor was Robert De Niro, one of the most respected and powerful performers of his generation, who had already established himself as the go-to choice for gritty New York characters through films like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. Lee's desire to cast De Niro made perfect sense on paper, as the role of Sal required someone who could portray both the warmth of a neighborhood fixture and the explosive anger that erupts when his world is challenged. De Niro seemed like the ideal choice to bring depth and authenticity to this complex character, who serves as both friend and antagonist to the predominantly black community he's served for decades. However, De Niro ultimately turned down the role, but he didn't leave Lee empty-handed. Instead of simply declining, De Niro made a suggestion that would prove to be incredibly valuable. He recommended Danny Aiello for the part. This recommendation came from De Niro's personal knowledge of Aiello's abilities, having worked with him previously on the 1984 gangster epic Once Upon a Time in America. Years later, Lee reflected on this casting disappointment and realized that De Niro's rejection was actually a blessing in disguise. Lee explained that an actor of De Niro's massive star power and reputation would have fundamentally changed the entire dynamic of the film. As Lee put it, Do the Right Thing had to be an ensemble piece, and a star of that magnitude would have changed everything. The film's power comes from its authentic portrayal of a neighborhood community, and De Niro's celebrity presence might have overshadowed the other performances and shifted audience focus away from the collective story Lee wanted to tell. Fact 3. Rosie Perez was crying during her nude scene. One of the most memorable and controversial scenes in Do the Right Thing features Rosie Perez's character Tina in an intimate moment where ice cubes are used to cool her down during the sweltering heat But what audiences don't see is the emotional distress happening just outside the camera frame. During the filming of this nude scene, Perez was actually crying, and the reason viewers can't see her face in the shot is because her head was deliberately cropped out to hide her tears. This was Perez's very first film role and her first experience with nude scenes in movies, which made the situation even more challenging for the young actress who had been discovered by Spike Lee while dancing at a Los Angeles nightclub. Perez later revealed in interviews that she had serious problems with how the scene was being filmed, explaining that while she wasn't necessarily opposed to taking her clothes off for the role, the atmosphere on set felt wrong and uncomfortable. In a candid interview with the New York Times in 2000, Perez described the experience in her own words, saying that when Spike Lee was placing ice cubes on her during filming, she was crying because she didn't want to do the scene. She explained that the reason her head doesn't appear in the shot is specifically because she was crying and expressing her discomfort with the situation. Perez characterized the entire experience as horrible and felt that she was being treated as an object rather than as a professional actress. She contrasted this negative experience with a later nude scene she did in White Men Can't Jump, where she felt completely comfortable and empowered because the director and her co-star Woody Harrelson made sure she felt respected and in control of the situation. Perez has since stated that Spike Lee apologized for the incident, and the two remained friends despite this difficult moment during production. Fact 4. Samuel L. Jackson slept through most of filming. While most actors on Do the Right Thing were running around the sweltering Brooklyn streets during the summer of 1988, Samuel L. Jackson found himself in a very different situation that led to one of the most unusual filming experiences of his early career. Jackson played Mr. Senor Love Daddy, the neighborhood radio DJ who provides commentary and music throughout the film. But this role came with an unexpected side effect that Jackson later joked about in interviews. Because his character was confined to the radio station booth for essentially all of his scenes, Jackson spent most of the production isolated from the main action happening outside on the streets of Bedford-Stuyvesant. As Jackson explained to Entertainment Weekly, he was always stuck in that radio station set, only seeing the film crew when they needed to shoot indoor scenes during rain delays, or when weather forced them to move production inside. The isolation led to Jackson developing some unusual habits during filming, as he revealed with characteristic humor that he spent much of his time on set sleeping because he had been out late the night before with friends. Jackson described looking out the window of the radio station set and watching everyone else film their scenes while wondering if he would ever get significant camera time, which created a somewhat surreal experience for the actor who was still building his career at that point. Jackson's co-star Bill Nunn, who played Radio Raheem, actually lived in Jackson's basement during filming in what they called the Cave, located on 143rd Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. This living arrangement meant that Jackson and Nunn would often spend their evenings hanging out together, which contributed to Jackson's late nights and subsequent need to catch up on sleep during the day while waiting around the radio station set for his scenes to be called. Fact 5. A bronze commemorative plaque was stolen overnight. On the final day of filming Do the Right Thing in the summer of 1988, Spike Lee and his production crew decided to create a permanent memorial to commemorate the historic movie they had just completed on Stuyvesant Avenue in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. They had a bronze plaque specially made and carefully installed it directly into the sidewalk, marking the exact location where they had transformed a dilapidated city block into the vibrant neighborhood setting that would become one of cinema's most famous streets. The crew went through all the proper channels to make this commemoration official, obtaining the necessary permits from New York City to permanently embed the bronze marker into the public sidewalk. The plaque contained details about the filming dates and acknowledged that this specific block had been the setting for Lee's groundbreaking film, creating what they hoped would be a lasting tribute to the movie's cultural significance and connection to the Bedford-Stuyvesant community. However, their plans for a permanent memorial were quickly derailed by the realities of street life in Brooklyn. When the crew returned the very next day, they discovered that the bronze plaque had completely vanished from the sidewalk. leaving only the empty space where it had been installed less than 24 hours earlier. Lee later recounted this incident with a mixture of frustration and dark humor, telling Entertainment Weekly that the plaque did not unscrew itself out of cement and just walk down Lexington Avenue, making it clear that someone had deliberately removed it during the night. He acknowledged the theft as a reflection of the old Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood's do-or-die mentality, where valuable items didn't last long on the streets. Even decades later, Lee has maintained hope that the plaque might someday resurface, publicly offering to buy it back from whoever took it with no questions asked, demonstrating his continued attachment to both the film and the neighborhood where it was made. Fact 6. Radio Raheem's boombox is in the Smithsonian. The massive boombox that became one of the most iconic props in cinema history now has a permanent home in one of America's most prestigious museums, where it serves as a symbol of both hip-hop culture and the film's lasting impact on American society. The actual Promax Super Jumbo boombox, carried by Bill Nunn's character Radio Raheem throughout Do the Right Thing, is currently on display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., as part of their A Changing America 1968 and Beyond exhibit. This wasn't just any ordinary piece of movie equipment that ended up in the museum by chance, but rather a carefully preserved piece of film history that took an interesting journey before reaching its final destination. After filming Wrapped, Spike Lee made the decision to personally inscribe the boombox with meaningful messages that reflected the character's significance and the film's themes, writing "Radio Raheem Lives" and "Fight the Power" in gold ink on the back of the device. Lee then gave this specially inscribed boombox to Gene Siskel, the legendary film critic who, along with his partner Roger Ebert, had championed Do the Right Thing and ranked it as the best film of 1989. The inscription on the boombox includes a dedication that reads, "Brooklyn, NY 31790. To Gene, Radio Raheem Lives, Love, Spike Lee, Fight the Power," creating a personal connection between the filmmaker and the critic who understood the movie's importance. The boombox itself is an impressive piece of technology, featuring dual audio cassette tape decks, an equalizer section, radio dial, colored light display, and multiple speakers including 8-inch subwoofers, mid-range speakers, and tweeters. It still bears the original Public Enemy stickers that were applied during filming, along with sections of red, yellow, and green electrical tape, and various graffiti-style markings that helped create Radio Raheem's authentic street aesthetic. Fact 7. Danny Aiello's real son plays his character's killer. One of the most unsettling casting decisions in Do the Right Thing involves a real-life father and son playing characters whose relationship ends in tragedy, creating an uncomfortable parallel between the actors' personal lives and the film's devastating climax. Rick Aiello, who is Danny Aiello's actual son in real life, was cast in the role of Officer Gary Long, the white police officer who kills Radio Raheem by putting him in a fatal chokehold during the film's most intense and heartbreaking scene. This casting choice means that viewers are watching a real father and son act out a scenario where the son's character is directly responsible for escalating the violence that destroys the father's character's life work. Danny Aiello plays Sal, the pizzeria owner, whose restaurant becomes the center of the neighborhood's racial tensions, while his real-life son Rick plays the police officer whose excessive force during Radio Raheem's arrest ultimately triggers the riot that burns down Sal's pizzeria and tears the community apart. The bizarre family dynamic becomes even more complex when you consider the emotional weight of the scenes they share on screen. In the aftermath of Radio Raheem's death, Sal must confront the reality that the police response to the situation at his restaurant has resulted in a young man's death and the destruction of everything he has built over 25 years in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, his real-life son is playing the officer whose actions directly caused this tragedy. This casting decision was not publicly discussed as being intentional commentary on family relationships or police violence. but rather appears to have been a practical choice during production. However, the result creates an additional layer of uncomfortable viewing for audiences who recognize the family connection, as it forces viewers to contemplate how violence and institutional racism can tear apart not just communities, but potentially families as well, even when the participants are simply actors playing roles. Fact 8. Public Enemy nearly broke up before the film's release. Just as Do the Right Thing was preparing for its nationwide release in the summer of 1989, the rap group whose song Fight the Power served as the film's musical heartbeat found themselves at the center of a major controversy that threatened to destroy both their career and the movie's success. Public Enemy actually disbanded in June of 1989, only 1 week before the film was scheduled to begin its limited theatrical run, creating a potential disaster for Spike Lee's groundbreaking movie. The crisis began when Professor Griff, who served as Public Enemy's Minister of Information and leader of their security team called the S1Ws, made anti-Semitic comments to the Washington Times newspaper. Griff told the publication that Jewish people were responsible for the majority of wickedness that goes on across the globe, sparking immediate outrage from the Jewish community and creating a firestorm of controversy that threatened to engulf everyone associated with the group. The timing could not have been worse for the film, as Fight the Power was not just featured in Do the Right Thing, but was central to its entire message and marketing campaign. The song plays during the opening credits, blasts from Radio Raheem's boombox throughout the movie, and had been specifically commissioned by Spike Lee to serve as the film's anthem of resistance and empowerment. Faced with the potential destruction of both his group and Lee's film, Chuck D made the difficult decision to fire Professor Griff and then announced that Public Enemy was essentially over due to disagreements among members about how to handle the situation. The group remained disbanded during the crucial first week of the film's release, with their record label Def Jam halting all their promotional activities and future recording plans. However, the success of Do the Right Thing and the positive reception of Fight the Power ultimately helped Public Enemy weather the storm, and they quietly reunited about a year later. Fact 9. Martin Lawrence made his film debut here. Long before Martin Lawrence became a household name through blockbuster action comedies like Bad Boys and his hit television sitcom Martin, he made his very first appearance on the big screen in a small but memorable role in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. Lawrence played a character named C, who is easily recognizable by his prominent lisp and his position as one of the neighborhood guys who hangs out on the street corner, commenting on the day's events as the summer heat intensifies around them. At the time of filming in 1988, Lawrence was still an unknown comedian trying to make his way in the entertainment industry, having grown up in Maryland and recently moved to New York to pursue his stand-up career. His casting in Do the Right Thing came during a period when Spike Lee was actively seeking authentic street performers and comedians to populate his vision of Bedford-Stuyvesant, believing that real comedians would bring a natural energy and improvisational skills to the neighborhood dynamics he wanted to capture. Lawrence was actually one of 4 stand-up comedians that Lee cast in supporting roles throughout the film, alongside Steve Park, Steve White, and Robin Harris, demonstrating the director's commitment to finding performers who could bring genuine humor and street credibility to their characters. These casting choices reflected Lee's belief that comedy was an essential part of how communities deal with stress and tension, and that professional comedians would understand how to balance humor with the serious racial themes the film was exploring. Lawrence's character C appears in several group scenes, where the neighborhood men gather to discuss everything from the oppressive heat to their relationships with women, and his distinctive speaking style and comedic timing made him stand out even in these ensemble moments. This early film experience helped launch Lawrence toward his later success in both television and movies, making Do the Right Thing an important stepping stone in what would become a highly successful career in entertainment. Fact 10. The character Smiley wasn't in the original script. One of the most memorable and touching characters in Do the Right Thing exists only because an actor refused to take no for an answer when he wanted to be part of Spike Lee's groundbreaking film. Smiley, the developmentally disabled man, who wanders through the neighborhood trying to sell hand-colored photographs of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Shaking Hands was never written into Lee's original screenplay and only came to exist through the persistent efforts of actor Roger Guenver Smith. Smith had been actively pursuing Lee for a role in the film, essentially pestering the director until Lee finally agreed to let him create his own character from scratch. Rather than writing a specific part for Smith, Lee gave him the creative freedom to develop an entirely original character that would fit naturally into the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood setting and contribute meaningfully to the film's themes of racial unity and civil rights history. The character that Smith created became one of the film's most powerful symbolic figures, representing both the community's connection to the civil rights movement and the way historical memory gets preserved and shared at the grassroots level. Smiley carries around these hand-colored photographs that show the two most important leaders of the Black freedom struggle standing together in friendship, despite their different philosophies about achieving racial equality through nonviolence versus self-defense. Smith's improvised performance included the character's distinctive speech pattern, which involves a severe stutter that makes his commercial pitch for the photographs both endearing and heartbreaking. The character appears throughout the film at crucial moments, including the final scene where he pins one of his photographs to the burned wall of Sal's Pizzeria, creating a powerful image that connects the historical civil rights struggle with the contemporary events that have just unfolded in the neighborhood. This entirely improvised character ended up becoming central to the film's message about the ongoing relevance of civil rights leadership. Fact 11. Bill Nunn was originally cast as the radio DJ. One of the most significant casting changes during the production of Do the Right Thing completely altered the film's dynamics and created what would become one of cinema's most iconic characters, all because Spike Lee decided to switch an actor from one role to an entirely different one partway through the pre-production process. Bill Nunn, who ultimately delivered an unforgettable performance as Radio Raheem, was originally supposed to play Mr. Senor Love Daddy, the smooth-talking neighborhood radio DJ who provides commentary and music throughout the film from his booth overlooking the street. Lee's initial vision had Nunn behind the microphone in the radio station, using his deep voice and commanding presence to serve as the neighborhood's musical narrator and voice of reason. However, as Lee continued developing the script and thinking about the characters, he realized that Nunn's imposing physical presence and natural intensity would be better suited for a different kind of role that required a more street-level, physically intimidating character. This realization led Lee to completely reimagine how he wanted to use Nunn in the film, moving him from the confined radio booth to the open streets, where he could interact directly with the neighborhood residents and become a more active participant in the escalating tensions. The role of Radio Raheem allowed Nunn to use his 6'2" frame and powerful screen presence to create a character who could be both gentle philosopher and intimidating force, depending on the situation. When Lee made this casting switch, he gave the radio DJ role to Samuel L. Jackson instead, which created a completely different energy for that character. Jackson brought a more playful, almost carnival-like quality to Mr. Senor Love Daddy, while Nunn's Radio Raheem became a brooding, complex figure whose love and hate monologue and tragic death became central to the film's emotional impact. This last-minute casting decision fundamentally changed the movie's character dynamics and gave audiences one of the most memorable figures in film history. Fact 12. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee were lifelong friends of Lee's father. The casting of two of the most respected actors in African-American theater and film history came about through decades-old personal relationships that connected the Lee family to some of the most important figures in Black entertainment and civil rights activism. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, who played the neighborhood elders Da Mayer and Mother Sister in Do the Right Thing, were not chosen through traditional auditions or casting calls, but rather because they had been close personal friends of Spike Lee's father, jazz musician Bill Lee, for many years before the film was ever conceived. Bill Lee, who composed and partially performed the film's jazz score, had developed friendships with Davis and Dee through their shared involvement in both the entertainment industry and civil rights movement during the 1950s and 60s. These relationships meant that Spike Lee had grown up knowing Davis and Dee as family friends rather than distant Hollywood celebrities, giving him a personal connection to actors who represented the dignity and wisdom of an older generation of black performers and activists. Davis and Dee were not just accomplished actors, but also passionate civil rights advocates who had worked alongside leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, making them perfect choices to play characters who serve as the moral conscience and historical memory of the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood. Their real-life marriage of over 50 years also brought authentic chemistry to their on-screen relationship as the mayor and mother-sister, two characters whose complicated friendship reflects both affection and frustration. The fact that Bill Lee was composing the film's musical score while his longtime friends Davis and Dee were starring in key roles created a unique artistic collaboration that spanned generations within the Lee family's circle of friends and colleagues. This personal connection helped ensure that the performances felt genuine and grounded in real relationships, contributing to the film's authentic portrayal of community dynamics and intergenerational wisdom. Fact 13. A newspaper heatwave shot took weeks to film. One of the most seemingly simple shots in Do the Right Thing actually required an extraordinary amount of time and technical precision to achieve, demonstrating Spike Lee's obsessive attention to detail and his commitment to creating the perfect visual atmosphere for his film. There's a brief scene where the camera slowly pans across the floor of a grocery store, gradually revealing a pile of newspapers with headlines describing the intense heat wave that's gripping New York City, and this single shot reportedly took weeks of filming to get exactly right. The challenge wasn't in the camera movement or the newspaper placement, but rather in achieving the precise lighting conditions that Lee and cinematographer Ernest Dickerson felt were necessary to convey the oppressive, suffocating heat that drives the entire story. The shot needed to capture not just the visual information of the newspapers announcing the heat wave, but also the feeling of that heat through the way light fell across the scene and created the proper shadows and highlights on the printed headlines. This meticulous approach to what most directors would consider a throwaway establishing shot reflects Lee's perfectionist philosophy throughout the entire production, where every visual element was carefully crafted to support the film's central theme of heat as both a literal weather condition and a metaphor for rising social tensions. Lee and his crew understood that the audience needed to feel the oppressive temperature in order to understand how it contributes to the characters' increasingly short tempers and aggressive behavior as the day progresses. The week spent perfecting this single newspaper shot also demonstrates how Lee was willing to invest significant time and resources into details that other filmmakers might rush through or treat as unimportant. This level of dedication to seemingly minor elements helped create the film's distinctive visual style and contributed to its overall effectiveness in making viewers feel like they were experiencing the sweltering heat alongside the characters in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Fact 14. The film premiered on Malcolm X's birthday. The world premiere of Do the Right Thing at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival created an extraordinary coincidence that connected the film's themes of racial struggle and civil rights leadership to one of the most important dates in African American history. The screening took place on May 19, 1989, which happened to be the 65th birthday of Malcolm X, the influential civil rights leader whose philosophy of black self-determination and resistance to oppression deeply influenced the film's message and conclusion. This timing was particularly meaningful because the film ends with contrasting quotes from both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., presenting their different approaches to achieving racial justice through either nonviolent resistance or self-defense when necessary. The coincidence of premiering on Malcolm X's birthday seemed to emphasize the ongoing relevance of his ideas about fighting against racial oppression, especially given the film's controversial ending where the neighborhood erupts in violence following Raheem's death at the hands of police. The significance of this date became even more profound when considering that Ossie Davis, who played the wise neighborhood elder Da Mayor in the film, had a direct personal connection to Malcolm X that went far beyond acting. In 1965, Davis had delivered the eulogy at Malcolm X's actual funeral, speaking to thousands of mourners at the Faith Temple Church of God in Christ in Harlem, and helping to cement Malcolm X's legacy as a transformative figure in the civil rights movement. This meant that one of the film's main actors had literally been present at one of the most important moments in Malcolm X's historical story, creating a direct link between the fictional world of Do the Right Thing and the real-world civil rights struggles that inspired Spike Lee's screenplay. The premiere date served as an unplanned tribute to Malcolm X's continuing influence on discussions about race, justice, and the appropriate responses to systemic oppression in American society. Fact 15. Barack and Michelle Obama's first date movie. Decades before Barack Obama would become the first African-American president of the United States, he was a young law student trying to impress a brilliant lawyer named Michelle Robinson by choosing the perfect movie for their very first date together in Chicago. The film that Obama selected for this crucial romantic occasion was Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee's powerful and controversial exploration of racial tensions in urban America, making it one of the most politically significant first-date movies in presidential history. The future first couple's afternoon began with lunch at the famous Art Institute of Chicago, where they spent time getting to know each other while surrounded by some of the world's greatest artwork. After their museum visit, Obama suggested they catch a movie, and his choice of Do the Right Thing revealed both his awareness of important contemporary social issues and his confidence that Michelle would appreciate a film that didn't shy away from difficult conversations about race relations in America. This movie selection turned out to be an inspired choice for several reasons, as it demonstrated Obama's interest in engaging with complex social and political topics rather than choosing something safe or purely entertaining for their first date. The film's unflinching examination of how racial prejudice and systemic inequality can explode into violence provided the young couple with plenty to discuss afterward, helping them discover their shared values and intellectual compatibility on issues that would later become central to Obama's political career. The fact that their relationship began with a shared viewing of one of the most important films about race in American cinema history seems particularly fitting given Obama's later role as the nation's first black president. Their choice to bond over Spike Lee's challenging and thought-provoking movie, rather than a typical romantic comedy or blockbuster, suggests that even in their earliest moments together, both Barack and Michelle Obama were drawn to meaningful conversations about justice, equality, and social change.